This is the NBC Theater. From the NBC Theater in Hollywood, a story by Henry James. The story of Daisy Miller. In its way, it's a wistful story, soft, with a typical Jamesian gentility, and ending, as James so often does, with a hard, unsuspected wallop of tragedy. Here it now is dramatized by Clarence A. Ross of NBC. The story of Daisy Miller by Henry James.
My name is Winterbourne. I'm an American. My residence, Geneva. I wish to tell you the story of a remarkable person with whom I was for a little while acquainted. It's a sad little story. Perhaps I tell it to you for my conscience' sake. Well, then, in the early summer of last year, the summer of 1875, that is, I crossed from Geneva to Vevey to see my aunt, who was stopping at that excellent hotel, the Three Crowns. When I arrived, I found her indisposed, with a headache. So I went into the garden and sat at a table watching people walk about. There was also a child, a boy of 9 or 10, remarkable for the complete carelessness, almost oddity of his clothes. I was drinking coffee, and presently the boy was standing before me.
Will you give me a lump of that sugar?
Well, you may take one, but I don't think sugar is good for little boys. You'll hurt your teeth.
I'll take 3. Haven't got any teeth to hurt. They all come out. It's this old Europe. At home they didn't come out.
Home is America?
That's right. Are you an American?
Yes.
American men are the best. Here comes my sister. She's American, too.
American girls are the best girls.
Not my sister. She's always after me.
Oh, that must be your fault, not hers.
Randolph, what are you doing?
I'm climbing the Alps. Watch me.
You look more as if you were falling down them.
He's an American man.
Randolph, you better be quiet.
This little boy and I have become acquainted.
We're going to Italy. I'd rather go back to America.
Have you never been to Italy, Miss...
No, sir.
Are you going over the Simplon?
I don't know. I suppose it's some mountain. Randolph, what mountain are we going over?
Going where?
To Italy.
I don't know. I want to go back to America.
Tell me your name, my boy.
Randolph C. Miller. I'll tell you hers, too.
You better wait until you're asked.
Her name is Daisy Miller, but her real name's Annie Miller. That's what's on her card.
It's a pity you haven't got one of my cards.
My father's name is Ezra Miller. My father ain't in Europe. My father's in a better place than Europe.
Oh? Oh, I'm sorry to hear.
My father's in Schenectady. He's got a big business. My father's rich, you bet.
Randolph, I think you better go and play. He doesn't like Europe, you know. He wants to go back.
To Schenectady?
And I'm going. Pretty soon, you bet. Thanks for the sugar.
He hasn't any boys here. Well, there's one, but he always goes round with a teacher, and they won't let him play. We thought of getting Randolph a teacher to travel round with us. And as soon as we get to Italy, or else
She
find
sat
some...
there with her pretty hands folded in her lap and talked on, as though she'd known me for years. I didn't know what to make of her. It was possible she was a coquette. At least she was so disposed toward conversation as to show a certain laxity of deportment. Were all American girls so deucedly sociable? Or had I only lived too long at Geneva? I sat there wondering, and meanwhile Miss Miller was still talking.
I've always had a great deal of society. I had 17 dinners given me last year, and 3 of them by gentlemen. I suppose there must be some society in Europe, but I haven't seen anything of it. Do you suppose there is any?
Oh, yes, I'm sure there is.
Oh, I don't know where it keeps itself. Have you been to that old castle over there? The one across the lake?
Why, yes. That's the castle of Chalon. A very historic place. Surely you've seen it.
I've heard it was something famous. I want to go.
It's a very nice excursion. And quite easy. You can take the little steamer.
Well, you can go in the cars, too. Our courier says they take you right up to the castle. Randolph won't go, and Mother's afraid to leave him alone. And the courier won't stay with him.
Couldn't you get someone else to stay with Randolph?
I wish you would stay with him. He seems to like you.
I should much rather go to Chalon with you, and Well, and your mother, of course.
I guess Mother won't go. She doesn't like to ride around in the afternoon. She and Eugenio can stay with Randolph. Eugenio's our courier. He doesn't like Randolph, but he's a splendid courier. He'll stay at home with Randolph if Mother does, and then we can go to the castle.
Certainly American girls were most remarkable. Or Miss Miller was a most remarkable American girl. A young lady at Geneva would have been mortally offended had I suggested such an excursion. But Daisy had positively urged me to take her, and alone. I was curious enough to refer to the Miller family when finally I was admitted to see my aunt.
A mother and daughter and a little boy? And a courier. Oh, yes, I've seen them and heard about them and kept out of their way.
Oh, you don't approve of them, then?
They're very common. They're the sort of Americans one does one's duty by not accepting.
Well, the young girl is very pretty.
Of course, she's pretty, but she's common. She has that charming look that they all have. I can't think where they pick it up.
Oh, my dear aunt, she is not, after all, a savage.
Why, she and her mother treat their courier like a familiar friend, like a gentleman. They've probably never seen a man with such good manners.
Well, I'm not a courier, and she was very charming to me.
You had better have said at first, Frederick, that you had made her acquaintance.
I should like you to meet her.
And pray, why?
Why, to guarantee my respectability.
And pray, who is to guarantee hers? Depend on it, Frederick, you're going to make some great mistake. You've been away from America too long. You're too innocent.
Oh, nonsense. You're very cruel, Auntie. She's a very nice girl, and I'm going to take her to the Castle of Chalon.
What an interesting project. In whose company, pray?
Why, only our own.
Oh, what a dreadful girl. I am afraid, my dear Frederick, I must decline the honor of her acquaintance. I am an old woman, but I am not too old, thank heaven, to be shocked.
Oh, Mr. Winterbourne, I'm so glad to see you. This has been the longest evening.
Have you been wandering about the garden alone, Miss Miller?
I was with Mother, but she's somewhere looking for Randolph.
And where did you learn my name?
Oh, I asked Eugenio, our courier. He knows everything. Your name is Winterbourne, and you're here visiting your aunt. She wears her hair in puffs and has headaches.
That's a very good description.
Oh, I want to know your aunt.
Why, I know she'd be delighted, but I'm afraid her headaches will interfere.
Perhaps she doesn't want to know me. Why don't you say so? Don't be afraid.
My dear young lady, she knows no one. It's her wretched health.
Don't be afraid. Why should she want to know me? Gracious, but she is exclusive. Oh, look, there's Mother.
How can you tell in this darkness?
I guess I know my own mother. Anyway, she's got on my shawl. She won't come this way, though, because she sees you.
Well, then I'll leave you if she doesn't approve of my walking with you.
Oh, it isn't you. It's her. She's so timid when I introduce a gentleman. Mother!
Are you quite certain?
Oh, do come on. Mother, this is Mr. Winterbourne.
I trust you found your son, Mrs. Miller.
Oh, yes. But I can't get him to go to bed. He's talking to the waiter. I guess he won't go to bed at all.
I think he's real tiresome.
Well, Daisy, I shouldn't think you'd want to talk against your own brother.
He wouldn't go to that castle. I'm going there with Mr. Winterbourne.
Your daughter, madam, has kindly allowed me the honor of being her guide. You do not feel disposed, madam, to undertake it yourself?
Oh, no. I guess you'd better go alone.
I remembered the vigilant mothers of the city of Geneva, and I could only be amazed at Mrs. Miller's seeming carelessness. I was still more puzzled by Daisy's conduct 2 days later at the Castle of Chalon. The fascination of the old place was quite lost on her, and she was disinterested until I happened to mention that my occupations would soon take me back to Geneva.
Occupations? You have no occupations. You're not in business.
That's true, Nevertheless, I must return to Geneva in a day or two. Look at this old fireplace, Miss Miller. Isn't it a pretty design?
You don't mean to say you're really going to leave Vevey?
The fact is, I am.
Well, Mr. Winterbourne, I think you're horrid.
Oh, please.
Whoever she is, she must be very charming, if you have to run back to her so quickly. Is she very charming?
Oh, Miss Miller, you're mistaken. I assure you.
Does she never allow you more than 3 days at a time? I suppose she'll come and fetch you if you stay another day. Oh, do stay, and I'll go down to the boat to see her.
You're very cruel. Do you know it?
Perhaps I mean to be. Look here, I'll stop teasing you. Only you must promise to come down to Rome next winter.
I shall be there.
Truly? You promise?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'd planned to go. My aunt has taken an apartment, and she wants me to come and see her.
Well, I don't want you to come for your aunt. I want you to come for me. So there.
Toward the end of January, I went to Rome, where my aunt had already been established for several weeks. There I found that the curious conduct of the Miller family was at least as curious as ever.
Oh, yes, they've turned up. Courier and all.
Well, Auntie, after what happened at Vevey, I think I'm certainly entitled to call on them.
If after what happens at Vevey and everywhere else, Frederick, you wish to keep up the acquaintance, you're very welcome. Of course, a man may know everyone. I must say, men are welcome to the privilege.
Well, pray, what is it that happens here, for instance?
The girl goes racketing about alone with a lot of foreigners. Third-rate Italians. As to what happens further, you must apply elsewhere for information.
Oh, come now, Auntie.
Well, I assure you she's picked up half a dozen of the regular Roman fortune hunters. And she brings them to people's houses. When she comes to a party, she brings with her a gentleman with a good deal of manner and a wonderful mustache.
Well, where's the mother?
I haven't the least idea. They're very dreadful people.
Oh, they're very ignorant, very innocent, that's all. Depend on it, they're not bad.
They're hopelessly vulgar. Whether or not being vulgar is being bad, that's a question for the philosophers. They're bad enough to be ignored, at any rate. And for this short life, that is quite enough.
And so I did not go immediately to call on Miss Daisy Miller. Daisy and I were bound to meet, however. A few days later, while I was calling on a lady I had known at Geneva, I was not surprised to hear the servant announce,
Madam Miller.
Miller? I beg your pardon, Mrs. Walker, but is she an American lady with a son and daughter?
Yes. Are you acquainted with them, Mr. Winterbourne?
Oh, we met briefly at Vevey.
Ah, then perhaps you know... Hush, here they are. Oh, dear, and they've brought the boy. Oh, good afternoon, Mrs. Miller. Miss Miller.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Walker. I declare, Mr. Winterbourne.
I told you I should come, Miss Miller.
Well, I didn't believe it.
See, I know you.
I dare say you know a great many things, Randolph. How's your education coming along?
We got a bigger place than this.
Randolph.
Well, it is bigger.
Well, sit down and try to be quiet.
Mrs. Walker, do let me tell you about the dress I've got for your party.
I hope you've been well since you left Vevey, Mrs. Miller.
She's got the dyspepsia.
Oh, I suffer from the liver. This climate isn't as bracing as Schenectady.
But I trust you're enjoying your stay in Rome.
Oh, I'm disappointed. We'd heard so much about it.
I hate it worse every day.
But your daughter, how does she like it here?
Oh, Daisy. Daisy's really carried away. Everyone's been so sociable, they've taken her right in. And then she's met plenty of gentlemen, too.
Are you talking about me? Mr. Winterbourne, I've been telling Mrs. Walker how mean you were to me.
My dearest young lady, here I've come all the way to Rome, and now you reproach me.
Just hear him, Mrs. Walker. Isn't he quaint?
Quaint, my dear?
Well, I don't know. Anyway, I want to tell you something.
Mother, we gotta leave here. Eugenio will raise something.
I'm not afraid of Eugenio. Mrs. Walker, it's about your party. I want to ask a favor. I want to bring a friend.
Oh, I shall be happy to see any of Mrs. Miller's friends. Oh, they're not my friends. I never met any of them.
He's a friend of mine, Mr. Giovanelli.
Oh, I see. I shall be glad to meet Mr. Giovanelli.
He's Italian. He's tremendously clever. Oh, he's perfectly lovely.
Well, then you must bring him by all means, Miss Miller. Come along now, Daisy. We'll go back to the hotel.
You may go if you like, Mother. I'm going to take a walk.
She's going to walk with Mr. Giovanelli.
I'm going to the Pincio.
Oh, my dear. At this hour, I don't think it's safe. Neither do I, Daisy. You'll catch a fever as sure as you live.
I shan't, and I'm going. I'm meeting a friend.
Mr. Giovanelli.
Beautiful Giovanelli.
Oh, my dear young friend, I beg you not to walk up to the Pincio at this unhealthy hour to meet a beautiful Italian. It's past 5 o'clock. The crowds in the park will be terrible.
Well, there's an easy way to settle it. If Mr. Winterbourne were as polite as he pretends, he'd offer to walk there with me. Goodness, it is crowded, isn't it? And how slowly everyone walks.
Miss Miller, is it possible that you would have really walked over here alone?
I don't suppose anyone would have hurt me.
Hurt you? My dear young lady, can't you understand?
I wonder where Mr. Giovanelli can be. Let's go over to the other side of the garden.
Oh, I certainly shan't help you find him.
Oh, then I shall find him without you. Oh, there he is, see? Leaning against that tree.
That man with the monocle? Oh, Miss Miller, you can't mean to speak to him.
I don't like the way you say that. I have never allowed a gentleman to interfere with anything I do.
Well, then you've made a mistake. You should sometimes listen to a gentleman. The right one.
And is Giovanelli the right one?
No, he's not.
Ah, Signorina Miller, how I have been waiting and longing to see you.
We walked together, the three of us, for perhaps a quarter of an hour. Giovanelli was extremely handsome, extremely urbane, extremely agreeable. He was, in fact, a very clever imitation of a gentleman. Oh, but certainly a nice girl should have known the difference. With these thoughts, I remained silent, while Giovanelli prattled on. But presently, I saw a carriage stop by the path, and someone beckoned to me. I found Mrs. Walker in a state of terrible agitation.
Oh, Mr. Winterbourne, that girl must not do this sort of thing. Why, 50 people have noticed her. She's ruining herself.
She's very innocent.
She is very unbalanced. Come, we must get her in here and take her home. Miss Miller? Miss Miller?
Do I see you again, Mrs. Walker? You didn't mention you were planning a drive. May I present my friend, Mr. Giovanelli?
Signor, I'm enchanted.
Come, Miss Miller. Get into the carriage and drive with me.
Oh, no, thank you. I love to walk.
You should walk with your mother, dear.
With my mother, dear? My mother never walked 10 steps in her life. And you know I'm more than 5 years old.
Quite so. You are old enough, my dear young friend, to be talked about.
Talked about? What do you mean?
Oh, come into the carriage and I will tell you.
No. I don't think I want to know.
Should you prefer being thought a very reckless girl?
Goodness me. Does Mr. Winterbourne think that to save my reputation I ought to get into the carriage?
I think you ought to get into the carriage.
I never heard of anything so stiff. If walking is improper, Mrs. Walker, then I am improper, and you must give me up. I hope you'll have a lovely ride. Giovanelli, come on.
Miss Miller. Miss Miller.
Let her go. Get in here, sir.
But I can't let her go off alone with...
Get in here.
Very well.
Drive on, Angelo. If the girl is determined to compromise herself, the sooner one knows it, the better.
Oh, but she means no harm.
She's done everything that isn't done here. Flirting, dancing all evening with the same partner, receiving callers at 10 in the evening, and now this. Walking with no chaperone in the Pincio. Oh, it's too dreadful. Why, no one will have anything to do with her from now on. And I advise you, Mr. Winterbourne, to have nothing to do with her either.
Walker had meant what she'd said about no one's having anything further to do with Daisy. Her long-awaited party took place some evenings later. Daisy arrived in all her splendor with Giovanelli, and Mrs. Walker cut her dead. A week afterward, I encountered the pair of them one afternoon, wandering in the ruined palace of the Caesars. The amiable Giovanelli strolled off to find a flower for his buttonhole, and I attempted to give Daisy another warning.
Aren't you lonely, Mr. Winterbourne? Can't you find anyone to walk with you?
I'm afraid I'm not as fortunate as your companion.
Oh, I know why you say that. You think I go round too much with him.
I'm afraid you're a flirt, my dear young lady.
Well, of course I am. Every nice girl is. Now I suppose you'll tell me I'm not a nice girl.
You're a very nice girl. But I wish you'd flirt with me and me only.
I wouldn't think of it. You're too stiff.
Oh, then at least I beg of you, stop flirting with Giovanelli. They don't understand that kind of thing here.
I thought they understood nothing else.
Oh, not in young unmarried women.
But it's more proper in young unmarried women than in old married ones. Anyway, I don't go round with them so much.
Everyone thinks so.
I don't believe it. They're only pretending to be shocked. They don't really care a straw what I do.
I think you will find that they do care.
How shall I find it?
Well, they'll give you the cold shoulder. Do you know what that means?
Do you mean as Mrs. Walker did the other night?
Exactly.
Well, then, I never heard of anything so stiff and poky, and I don't care what they think. You can't be my friend if you let people be so unkind.
After this, I called several times at the Millers' Hotel, but Daisy was never at home. Neither was she at the homes of our common acquaintances, for they had simply ceased to invite her. They were expressing, for the benefit of observant Europeans, the great truth that Daisy Miller's conduct was not normal in a young American girl. But I myself was greatly disturbed. I could not decide whether her defiance was innocence or recklessness. One wonderfully beautiful evening, I was returning on foot from a villa where I had dined, Colosseum, and it occurred to me that it was worth a glance in the moonlight. I passed into the clear and silent arena, and never had it seemed so impressive. Arches on arches, Byron wrote, and as it were that Rome, collecting the chief trophies of her line, would build up all her triumphs
standing there
in one
talking
dome.
to himself.
It would appear, Signorina, to be your friend, the Signor Winterbourne.
I stood there in horror, and then in relief. All the riddles of Daisy's behavior were now solved for me. It was almost midnight, and she was alone with Giovanelli in the Colosseum. One need no longer respect her.
Why, it's Mr. Winterbourne. Do you suppose he's going to cut me?
Miss Miller, good heavens.
Were you reciting poetry? Do go on.
How long have you been here?
All evening. I never saw anything so pretty.
I think Roman fever very pretty. The night air in this place is no better than a cloud of malaria.
I told the Signorina it was dangerous, but when was the Signorina ever prudent?
I never was sick, and I don't mean to be. And I was bound to see the Colosseum by moonlight. I wouldn't have gone home without it. Anyway, if I do get sick, Eugenio has some wonderful pills.
I advise you to drive home as fast as you can and take one.
Ah, that is very wise. I will go and make sure of the carriage.
Oh, must I really leave now? It's all so beautiful. Don't you think it was wonderful of Mr. Giovanelli to bring me? I said I had to see it, and I have. It's the thing. Why don't you say anything, Mr. Winterbourne?
Come along. I think I see your carriage.
Stop a minute. Do you believe I'm engaged to Mr. Giovanelli?
Oh, it doesn't matter what I believe.
Well, what do you believe?
I believe it makes very little difference whether you're engaged or not.
We come along. The carriage.
And don't forget Eugenia's pills.
I shan't take one. I don't care whether I have Roman fever or not.
Well, I must say it's no more than one would have expected. If that young woman had known how to conduct herself, it never would have happened.
Oh, what are you talking about, Auntie?
Do you mean to say you haven't heard, Frederick? It's all over Rome. Your little Miss Miller went to the Colosseum at night with her dear lawyer and caught herself a raging fever. They say she's very unlikely to live.
Poor Daisy was terribly ill. I went every day to the hotel for news, but seldom found any. During this time, I saw Mrs. Miller only once.
Daisy spoke of you the other day, Mr. Winterbourne. She told me to tell you she never was engaged to that handsome Italian. I'm sure I'm very glad. I don't know why she wanted you to know, but she said 3 times, "Mind you tell Mr. Winterbourne." And she told me to ask you if you remembered the time you went to that castle in Switzerland. But I said I wouldn't give any such message as that.
Daisy was buried in the little Protestant cemetery, under the cypresses and the thick spring flowers. There were a great many mourners, more than the scandal of her career would have led you to expect. Near me stood Giovanelli, very pale, with no flower in his buttonhole. He came continually closer to me. It appeared he wanted to say something.
The signorina. She was the most beautiful young lady I ever saw, and the most amiable, and she was the most innocent.
And the most innocent?
Yes.
Oh, Giovanelli, why the devil did you take her to that fatal place?
For myself, I had no fear, and she wanted to go.
Well, that was no reason.
If she had lived, I would have got nothing. She would never have married me, I'm sure.
No?
For a moment, I hoped so. But no, I'm sure.
I stood staring at the grave. When I looked around again, Giovanelli was gone. The following summer, I again met my aunt at Vevey. She was fond of Vevey. I spoke to her of Daisy Miller. It was on my conscience that I had done her an injustice.
But, my dear boy, how did your supposed injustice affect her?
She sent me a message before she died, Auntie. Oh, I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now. She would have appreciated one's esteem.
Is that a modest way of saying that she would have reciprocated one's affection?
You were right in what you said to me last summer. I was booked to make a mistake. I have lived too long in foreign parts.
You have heard a dramatization of Daisy Miller by Henry James, adapted for radio by Clarence A. Ross. In today's cast, Winterbourne was Gray Stafford. Randolph was Johnny McGovern. Daisy Miller was Kay Stewart. The aunt was Georgia Backus. Mrs. Miller was Lois Austin. Mrs. Walker was Margaret Brayton. Giovanelli was Don Randolph. Your announcer, Don Stanley. Be with us again at the NBC Theater a week from tonight, when we will bring you a dramatization of The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg by Mark Twain, and the following week for The Withered Arm by Thomas Hardy. Executive producer for the NBC Theater is Wade Arnold. The director of the NBC Theater is Andrew C. Love. This program came to you from Hollywood. This is NBC, the national broadcasting company.